For many centuries, the Avatar, master of all four elements, maintained balance between the four nations: water, earth, fire, and air. But one day he mysteriously vanished, plunging the world into chaos. The Fire Nation, seizing the opportunity presented by the Avatar's absence, waged war against the other nations. The war has lasted for 100 years, and hope for the Avatar's return has almost faded. People across the world suffer from destruction and loss. Even the men from a small southern water tribe village left to help the Earth Kingdom, leaving teenagers Sokka and Katara to care for the village and find food. One day, in search of food, Sokka and Katara go fishing. They equip a boat and set out to catch fish. Sokka tries to impress with his spear skills, while Katara decides to use her waterbending. She manages to trap a fish in a water bubble and lift it into the air. Proudly, she turns to her brother, but Sokka, distracted by his own actions, accidentally bursts the bubble with his spear. As a result, Sokka gets soaked and angrily blames his sister for her failed sorcery. In the midst of their argument, the boat gets caught in a current and crashes into ice floes, leaving them stranded in the ocean. The tragedy doesn't stop their argument. Sitting on an ice floe, Sokka continues to blame magic for their misfortune, stating that Katara should have stayed home. This angers Katara, and in a fit of emotion, she accidentally splits a massive iceberg behind her. To Sokka's surprise, a frozen sphere with a boy inside emerges from the broken iceberg. This boy is Aang, an airbender. He awakens, and despite Sokka's protests, Katara helps him out. Meanwhile, on a Fire Nation ship, Prince Zuko, who is determined to capture the Avatar and restore his honor, notices a beam of light from the broken iceberg. He sees it as a sign and orders his crew to head towards the light's source. Katara and Sokka decide to return to their village, taking Aang with them. They fly on a flying bison named Appa. Aang demonstrates his airbending abilities, impressing the villagers, especially the children. However, his attempts to impress end up destroying a snow tower built by Sokka, causing his displeasure. On the Fire Nation ship, Zuko trains hard, eager to capture the Avatar. His uncle Iroh, an experienced and wise mentor, tries to calm him down, reminding him that their ancestors have been searching for the Avatar for 100 years without success. But Zuko is determined and ready to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal. Aang and Katara go on a penguin sledding safari, which leads them to an old Fire Nation ship frozen in ice. Despite Katara's warnings about traps, Aang boldly steps inside, taking the girl with him. Walking through the dark corridors, they reach the armory. Katara tells Aang about the first attack by the Fire Nation, but Aang, not believing in the war, doesn't give it much thought. The girl suggests that he spent 100 years in the ice sphere. Shocked by this revelation, Aang briefly loses confidence, but Katara supports him, and they continue towards the exit. However, Aang accidentally triggers a trap, and a signal flare shoots into the sky. They quickly escape, but the flare has already attracted Zuko's attention. On the ship, Zuko notices the signal flare and orders his assistant to wake up his uncle. Through a telescope, he sees the village and decides to head there immediately. Aang and Katara approach the village, where all the residents have gathered at its entrance, looking at the bright rocket in the sky. Children run joyfully towards the young airbender, but the adults, including Sokka, look at him with suspicion. Sokka accuses Aang of deliberately signaling to the Fire Nation. Katara and Aang explain that it was a trap on the old ship, and Gran reminds Katara that she shouldn't have gone there. Aang takes the blame, and Sokka orders him to leave the village. Katara tries to defend Aang, but no one supports her. Angrily, she declares that she will leave with him, but Sokka reminds her of her duty to the tribe and family. Not wanting Katara to quarrel with her loved ones, Aang asks her to stay and leaves on Appa. Gran comforts Katara, but she blames her for losing the chance to become a true waterbender. Sokka calls everyone to prepare for defense. Not far from the village, Aang misses his new friends when he sees a Fire Nation ship heading towards the village. He orders Appa to stay and rushes back. Meanwhile, Zuko and Sokka prepare for battle. Sokka climbs the wall and sees the Fire Nation ship destroy the watchtower and breach the village wall. Fire Nation warriors, led by Zuko, descend the ramp. Sokka rushes into the fight, but Zuko easily overpowers him, tossing him into a snowdrift. Zuko demands the Avatar, grabbing Gran and threatening the villagers. Sokka attacks again, but Zuko easily disarms him. At that moment, Aang, riding a penguin, knocks Zuko off his feet. The villagers cheer Aang, but Zuko calls him the Avatar. Aang uses his staff to deflect fire attacks, but realizes the fight is too dangerous for the village. He surrenders, extracting a promise from Zuko to leave the village. Aang is taken onto the ship. While the villagers rebuild the village, Katara decides to rescue Aang. Sokka supports her and prepares a boat for the journey. Gran brings another blanket and says Katara has given her new hope, reminding her that the Avatar's fate is intertwined with theirs. Just when it seems the boat can't catch up with the ship, Appa appears. On the ship, Zuko takes Aang's staff and orders him to be taken to the brig. Aang easily overpowers the guards and returns to the deck in search of his staff. Katara and Sokka try to get Appa to fly, finally remembering the command, "Yip yip." Appa soars into the air, to the delight of the brother and sister. Aang fights his way through the ship's corridors using airbending. Eventually, he finds his staff, but Zuko shoves him into a room and starts a fight. Aang's agility allows him to dodge fire attacks, and he knocks Zuko out, grabbing his staff. Aang climbs to the top of the superstructure, but Zuko catches up to him, forcing him to land. The fight continues until Appa appears. Zuko knocks Aang overboard, but he enters the Avatar state and creates a powerful water vortex, defeating the Fire Nation warriors. Sokka and Katara save Aang and they fly on Appa, avoiding a fireball sent by Zuko. On Appa's back, Katara asks Aang how he created the water vortex, but he doesn't know. She also asks why he didn't tell them he was the Avatar, and Aang replies that he doesn't want to be the Avatar. Katara reminds him of the legend and encourages him not to despair. Aang is happy that they can study waterbending together. The friends decide to help each other in everything. Suddenly, Aang pulls out a map and points to several spots where they must stop to ride various animals. The journey begins. Aang, Katara, and Sokka set up camp on the riverbank. At dawn, Aang woke up eagerly to reach the Southern Air Temple, where he spent his childhood. Katara tried to warn him that 100 years had passed, but Aang, full of optimism, didn't want to listen. He woke Sokka by imitating a snake in his sleeping bag, causing everyone to laugh. As they approached the mountain range, Sokka discovered with horror that the bag of jerky was empty. Aang innocently admitted that he used it to start a fire. Katara tried to explain to Aang that airbenders hadn't been seen for a long time, and told him that the Fire Nation killed her mother. Aang was confident that the only way to reach the temple was on the flying bison. Appa began to climb sharply, and soon they saw the air temple. Climbing up the serpentine path to the temple, Aang ran ahead of his friends while Sokka complained about his empty stomach. Aang showed them the airball court and other places from his childhood. To distract him from sad thoughts, Sokka suggested playing airball. The score was a crushing 7-0 in Aang's favor, and Sokka flew into a snowdrift with the ball. In the snow, he found a Fire Nation warrior helmet. Katara tried to hide it from Aang, but Sokka warned her that she couldn't hide everything. Approaching the central building, Aang showed his friends the statue of Monk Gyatso, his mentor and the greatest airbender. Aang recalled how they baked fruit pies and played pranks on other monks. Aang, Sokka, and Katara headed to the temple's center. They encountered large doors with an unusual lock that could only be opened with the airbending. Aang focused and sent airstreams into the door's pipes, opening them. Inside, they found a hall full of Avatar statues representing the reincarnation cycle. Aang froze at the statue of Avatar Roku and remembered him but didn't know how. At that moment, they heard a strange sound and hid, thinking it was an enemy. It turned out to be a lemur. Aang decided to keep it as a pet, while Sokka wanted to eat it. They chased the lemur with different intentions. Using airbending, Aang easily outpaced Sokka and continued the pursuit alone. The chase led Aang to a building full of skeletons. Among them, he found Monk Gyatso's skeleton with his necklace. Kneeling, Aang suddenly entered the Avatar state and his eyes lit up. Katara saw the statue's eyes light up and ran after Aang. Signals of the Avatar's return lit up in other temples, and the Fire Nation sent word to their ruler. Aang created a powerful vortex, throwing Sokka aside. Katara tried to calm him, reminding him that they couldn't bring Gyatso back, but he now had a new family, her and Sokka. The hurricane winds calmed, and Aang descended to the ground. He confessed that he was now the last airbender, and Katara hugged him tightly. Before Roku's statue, Aang wondered how he could help him. Katara assured him that they would figure something out. Suddenly, the lemur appeared with fruit. Aang named it Momo, and they left the temple, leaving behind the majestic towers. Zuko brought his damaged ship to a Fire Nation port. He warned Iroh not to tell anyone about the Avatar, but Commander Zhao overheard part of their conversation. Zhao invited them to his quarters and asked about the search for the Avatar. Zuko lied, saying they had encountered an Earth Kingdom ship, but the warriors admitted that the Avatar had been captured and escaped, and Zuko realized his plan had failed. Zhao mocked Zuko and forbade him from continuing the search for the Avatar. Enraged, Zuko challenged him to a duel, which Zhao gladly accepted, hoping to humiliate him. Iroh reminded Zuko of the previous duel and the basics of firebending. In the arena, Zuko initially struggled, but then went on the offensive and won. Zhao urged him to finish him off, but Zuko refused, promising not to spare him next time. When Zhao attacked Zuko from behind, Iroh intervened, extinguishing the attack, and declared that even in exile, Zuko was more honorable than Zhao. Zuko is training in his cabin when Iroh enters with news. Iroh reports that they don't know where the Avatar is. Enraged, Zuko jumps up and looks at the map, noting the Avatar's deceptive maneuvers. Appa lands in the bay of a small island. Sokka and Katara are unhappy with the frequent stops, but Aang explains that Appa is tired. Appa confirms this with a yawn, and Aang points out to his friends the sea where a giant fish jumps out. Aang dives into the water and ends up on the fish's back. A large shadow appears underwater. Sokka and Katara try to call out to Aang, but he encounters the huge fin of a creature and rushes to the shore, knocking Sokka down. They are captured by the Kyoshi warriors. Tied to a post, they are interrogated. Sokka cannot believe they were captured by women, which angers the leader, who threatens to feed them to the Unagi. Aang declares that he is the Avatar and flies into the air, breaking the ropes and performing a trick with pebbles. The villagers are delighted. The rumor of the Avatar's appearance spreads quickly, and Zuko learns about it. He interrupts his meal and orders the preparation of the rhinos. The friends are housed in a large building and well fed. Sokka is displeased and leaves, grabbing some food. Katara asks Aang not to relax, as they can't stay here for long. Aang assures her that the adoration won't go to his head and enjoys the fans outside the window. Aang has fun with the girls. Meanwhile, Sokka enters the hall where the Kyoshi warriors are training. They apologize for the previous day, and Sokka starts bragging about his skills. The leader asks him to give them a lesson. Sokka tries to attack, but his blows are deflected and he ends up tied up. Aang remembers Katara and finds her at the market. He offers to ride Appa, but Katara refuses, upset by his comment about jealousy, and leaves. Sokka reconsiders and returns to the training hall, asking for lessons and apologizing. Suki agrees, but on the condition that he follows the Kyoshi warriors' traditions. Sokka has to wear a female dress, symbolizing the courage and honor of the Kyoshi warriors. Aang offers Katara a ride on the Unagi, but she ignores him. In the training hall, Suki explains to Sokka how to use the opponent's strength against them. Sokka quickly grasps it and pins the teacher to the ground. Aang swims in the bay, but the Unagi does not appear. The girls get tired of waiting and leave. Katara arrives. The friends reconcile. At that moment, the enormous fin of the Unagi appears. The creature tries to grab Aang, who flies away and loses consciousness. Katara pulls him ashore with a stream of water. From behind the coastal rocks, she sees Zuko's ship. The warriors and Zuko, mounted on war rhinos, head to the village, not noticing Katara and Aang. Katara uses waterbending to extract the water Aang swallowed. The Avatar regains consciousness. The fire warriors search for the Avatar. At that moment, the Kyoshi warriors attack. They deal with the enemy and move towards Zuko, who scatters the warrior women with streams of fire. Zuko sees Aang. The fight is short. Aang creates a wind wave, throwing Zuko into a building wall. Unfurling his glider, he flies into the air, sadly watching the burning village. Aang lands next to Katara, who says they need to leave immediately so that Zuko leaves the villagers alone. Sokka says goodbye to Suki, embarrassed by her kiss. Climbing onto Appa, the friends fly over the village. Zuko sees the escapees and orders his men to return to the ship. Flying over the bay, Aang jumps into the sea. Riding the Unagi, Aang makes it spray water over the village, extinguishing the fires and soaking the fire warriors. Returning to Appa, Aang is embraced by Katara. All disagreements are forgotten. Aang, Katara, and Sokka set off for the grand city of Ashu, which towers on a steep cliff in the Earth Kingdom. To hide his true identity, Aang disguises himself as an old man with a thick mane and mustache made from Appa's fur. They quickly realize that the city, which Aang described as friendly, is actually full of guards ready to take harsh measures even for a cart of cabbages. Aang takes the initiative, pretending to be a grumpy grandfather and scolding the guards, allowing them to enter the city. Once inside, he shows his friends the amazing postal system of Omashu, which in his childhood served as a great slide for him and his old friend Bumi. Aang decides to repeat the childhood fun, and despite Katara's objections, puts his friends in a postal cart and sends them down the chutes. The wild ride ends with the destruction of a cabbage cart, and the trio is captured and brought before the king. Instead of punishing them, the king arranges a feast for them, but unexpectedly reveals the truth that Aang is the Avatar by throwing a chicken leg at him, forcing him to use airbending. The king, who is crazy but insightful, devises 3 dangerous challenges for Aang to test his abilities and character. The first task is to retrieve a key hanging inside a powerful waterfall in a cave. Aang finds an unconventional solution by throwing a stalactite, which knocks down the key. In the second challenge, he must find the king's pet named Flopsy. Aang initially mistakes a rabbit for a huge gorilla, but then realizes that the gorilla is Flopsy and successfully completes the task. The final challenge is a duel against the king himself. Aang, fighting the powerful earthbender, demonstrates agility and ingenuity, using the surroundings and the earthbender's abilities against him. Finally, Aang wins, but the king poses one last question.
What is my name?
Katara helps Aang realize that the tasks required unconventional thinking. Aang guesses that the king is his old friend Bumi. Bumi releases Sokka and Katara, revealing that the Genomite was just candy. He tells Aang about the importance of restoring balance in the world and the upcoming battle with the Fire Lord. As a sign of friendship and a reminder of their childhood, Aang and Bumi ride down the city's chutes, ending the day with joyful laughter and another destroyed cabbage cart. In a new episode of their adventures, Aang, Katara, and Sokka stumbled upon a mining village. Sokka, who had gone out to search for food, returned with a handful of nuts and stones. Suddenly, they heard a rumble and ran toward the sound. They saw a young man practicing earthbending who immediately fled when he noticed them. Aang suggested they find the village to gather more information, and they soon discovered the mining village. In the village, Aang quickly traded the nuts for a local hat. Katara noticed the young man and followed him into a shop. It turned out his name was Haru, and he was hiding his earthbending abilities out of fear of the Fire Nation. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was Fire Nation guards who had come to collect taxes, doubled by their commander. After the guards left, Haru's mother explained that their village had been under Fire Nation oppression for 5 years, and earthbending only brought trouble. Feeling sympathy for Haru, Katara went with him to his home, where he told her about his father, who was captured because of his earthbending. Katara, in turn, shared the story of her mother, who was killed by Fire Nation soldiers. These shared losses brought them closer. The next day, Haru and Katara witnessed a cave-in at the mine, trapping one of the miners. Despite his fear of the guards, Haru used earthbending to save the man. That night, due to the report of the rescued miner, Haru was arrested by Fire Nation guards. At dawn, Katara discovered Haru's arrest and felt guilty for what had happened. She decided to help him, devising a plan to get herself arrested for earthbending. With Aang and Sokka's help, she staged an earthbending act, leading to her arrest. Katara was taken to a floating prison for earthbenders. There, she reunited with Haru and his father Tyro. Trying to inspire the prisoners to revolt, Katara gave a passionate speech, but the earthbenders, having lost hope, did not respond. Meanwhile, Aang and Sokka, following the ship on Appa, decided to find a way to help Katara. Katara met with Aang and Sokka at night, and they devised a plan. Using coal from the prison's furnaces, Aang created an air vortex, scattering the coal onto the prison deck. Katara once again called the earthbenders to action. Haru was the first to respond, throwing a rock at the warden, followed by Tyro, who protected his son with a wall of coal. Inspired by their example, the earthbenders began to fight, throwing the guards and the warden overboard. After freeing themselves, Haru and Tyro thanked Katara for her help and bravery. Haru offered Katara to stay, but she declined, saying she needed to help Aang reach the North Pole. At the last moment, Katara realized she had lost her necklace, which was later found by Prince Zuko, preparing for a new phase in his hunt for the Avatar. Aang, Katara, and Sokka were flying over huge white clouds. Katara remarked that they looked like fluffy pieces of cotton. Aang immediately decided to check it out and jumped down. While Sokka and Katara fearfully looked down, he reappeared behind them on his glider, soaking wet. Aang confidently declared that clouds are made of water and dried himself off by creating an air current. At that moment, Katara noticed a black scar in the middle of the green forest. Appa landed in the ash and remnants of trees. Sokka noticed tracks and realized that the fire was the work of the Fire Nation. A saddened Aang fell to his knees and scooped a handful of ash into his palm, blaming himself for what had happened. Katara tried to comfort him, reminding him of their mission. To lift Aang's spirits, Katara threw an acorn at him, explaining that each acorn would eventually become a mighty tree and the forest would be reborn. Suddenly, an old wanderer appeared, who immediately recognized Aang as the Avatar and asked for his help with the village. At sunset, they entered the village and learned that it was being attacked by an evil spirit named Hei Bai, who was kidnapping people. The solstice was approaching, when the boundary between the spirit world and the physical world would disappear, and Hei Bai could cause even more trouble. Aang decided to help, hoping that knowledge of the spirit world would come to him naturally. That night, Aang stayed outside alone, ready to face the spirit. When Hei Bai appeared, Aang tried to talk to him, but the spirit began to destroy the village. Sokka, unable to stand by, rushed to help, but was captured by the spirit and taken into the forest. Aang flew after them but could not catch Hei Bai. In the forest, he stumbled upon a stone statue of a bear and lost consciousness. Upon waking, Aang found himself in the spirit world. He tried to communicate with Katara and Appa, but they couldn't see him. Aang called for Avatar Roku's help and saw a huge ghostly dragon. Realizing that this was Roku's companion, much like Appa was to him, Aang rode the dragon, which took him to the Crescent Island and the Fire Temple. In the temple, the dragon showed Aang that on the day of the winter solstice, he would be able to talk to Roku. Returning to the real world, Aang headed back to the village. At sunset, Aang met with Katara, but did not know where Sokka was. When Hei Bai appeared again, Aang realized that the spirit was actually the guardian of the forest destroyed by the fire. He showed Hei Bai an acorn, assuring him that the forest would regenerate. The spirit accepted the acorn and transformed into a panda, then disappeared. The kidnapped people, including Sokka, returned. The village chief thanked Aang and offered help for their journey. Aang told his friends that they needed to reach the island on the day of the solstice, which was already tomorrow. Meanwhile, Zuko was angry at Uncle Iroh, who was relaxing in a hot spring instead of searching for the Avatar. Giving his uncle half an hour to get ready, Zuko returned to the ship. Iroh fell asleep and woke up only when he was attacked by earthbenders. They recognized him as the brother of the Fire Lord and the former general who besieged Ba Sing Se. Zuko found signs of the struggle and set off to find his uncle. The earthbenders decided to judge Iroh on the spot. Iroh used his hot breath to free himself from the shackles and scare the ostrich horses, but he was captured again. At that moment, Zuko appeared. He freed his uncle, and together they defeated the earthbenders. Zuko asked Iroh to get dressed, and they continued their pursuit of the Avatar. Late at night, Aang was trying to get Appa to fly, intending to go to Crescent Island alone. Katara and Sokka stood in front of Appa, deciding not to let Aang go by himself. Appa gently licked Sokka, and all three, along with Momo, got into the saddle. The village chief handed Aang a bundle of food and wished him luck. Appa soared into the sky. At dawn, flying over the ocean, Aang asked Appa to increase speed. Zuko was watching them from his ship. Iroh said that returning to the Fire Nation was foolish, but Zuko was obsessed with the chase. Katara noticed the pursuit and warned Aang. Zuko's warriors prepared the catapult. Zuko personally lit the projectile, but Appa dodged the shot. Ahead, a line of Fire Nation ships appeared. Iroh advised his nephew to turn back, but Aang directed Appa straight toward the blockade. Zuko followed him. Commander Zhao, seeing the maneuver, decided he was in luck and ordered to open fire. Appa maneuvered, dodging the projectiles. One of the fireballs damaged Zuko's ship, but he did not stop. During the complex maneuvers, Sokka fell out of the saddle and Aang had to catch him over the water. Aang destroyed the last fireball with airbending, and the blockade was left behind. Zhao decided not to interfere with Zuko, hoping he would lead him to the Avatar. When the friends reached Crescent Island, they headed to the Fire Temple. Meeting 5 temple guards, Aang introduced himself but was met with fire attacks. Aang knocked the guards down with an air wave. The head sage ordered them to split up and catch the Avatar. The fugitives found themselves at a dead end, but one of the guards, Shu, knew that Aang wanted to speak with Avatar Roku. He opened a secret passage, and the friends trusted him. Zuko, trying to deceive Zhao, launched a small boat. The guard explained that Roku had built secret magma tunnels. A month ago, Roku's statue's eyes lit up, leading them here. The friends reached the sanctuary, but the doors were locked and could only be opened with 5 simultaneous firebending strikes. Sokka suggested using oil pouches instead of firebending. The pouches didn't work, and the sages, hearing the explosion, ran upstairs. Shu convinced them that the Avatar was already inside. They opened the doors, but inside was only Momo. A fight ensued, and Zuko grabbed Aang. The sages tied up Shu, Sokka, and Katara. Aang broke free from the prince's grasp and slipped into the closing doors. Inside the sanctuary, Aang met Avatar Roku. Roku explained that 100 years ago, a comet had allowed Fire Lord Sozin to start the war. The comet would return at the end of this summer, and Ozai would use its power to end the war. Aang realized that he had little time to master the elements. Roku promised to help him overcome the ambush at the temple. The sanctuary doors opened, and Aang in Roku's form emerged. The firebenders attacked him, but Roku created a fire sphere, defeating them. Katara and Sokka freed themselves and ran out of the temple. The friends jumped onto Appa's back and soared into the sky. The fire temple was engulfed in magma. Zhao accused the sages of treason and ordered them sent to the Fire Lord. Zuko, on the small boat, continued his pursuit of the Avatar. Aang was pacing back and forth on Appa's back, worried about the little time left to master the elements. Katara calmed him down, offering to teach him what she knew about waterbending. Sokka sarcastically promised to find a puddle for her to practice. On their journey, they came across a beautiful waterfall, where Katara began showing Aang waterbending techniques. Aang quickly learned how to push-pull water and create a water whip, making Katara a bit envious. She tried to teach him wave raising, but it proved more challenging. Although Aang quickly succeeded, flooding Appa and Sokka, Katara struggled with the technique. They went to a trading port for supplies, where Aang spent some of their money on a whistle, further irritating Sokka. At the pier, the friends encountered pirates selling exotic goods. In one of the cabins, Katara found a scroll with waterbending techniques she desperately wanted to buy. The pirate captain asked for an enormous sum, and the friends left empty-handed. However, the pirates sensed something was wrong and began pursuing them. Katara, showing her agility as a thief, stole the scroll, leading to a chase through the market. Using airbending, Aang helped his friends escape from the pirates, but they remained determined. Back at the waterfall, Katara proudly displayed the scroll. Meanwhile, in the port, while Uncle Iroh was searching for a pie show tile, Zuko learned about the Avatar and made a deal with the pirates, deciding to use them for his purposes. Katara began studying the new technique at night, which attracted the attention of the pirates and Zuko. She was captured and interrogated about Aang's whereabouts. Tied to a tree, Katara refused to speak, even when Zuko offered to return her lost necklace. The pirates, dissatisfied, demanded the scroll back, threatening to burn it. In the morning, Aang and Sokka couldn't find Katara or the scroll and were immediately attacked by pirates. Captured, Sokka devised a clever plan, convincing the pirates that the Avatar was worth more than the scroll. This caused a skirmish between Zuko and the pirates, allowing Aang and Sokka to free themselves. In the chaos, they found Katara, freed her, and tried to escape on the pirate ship. Zuko and the pirate captain dueled, but by then, the friends had managed to activate waterbending to push the ship into the water. The pirates chased them in their boat. The battle on board was intense. Aang used airbending, and Katara finally managed to use the water whip. However, danger loomed in the form of a waterfall. Aang blew the whistle, summoning Appa, and they were rescued at the last moment. High above the clouds, Katara apologized for her envy, and Sokka, realizing she was genuinely sorry, returned the scroll he had managed to save during the fight. While the friends were taking a break in the forest, Momo got caught in a trap baited with a pyramid of nuts. Aang noticed his absence, and they went searching for him, quickly freeing the lemur. Nearby, there were 2 more traps with captured pig monkeys, which the friends also freed. Sokka examined the traps and concluded that Fire Nation people were nearby. He suggested they continue on foot to avoid detection, but Katara was ironic about his plan. However, they agreed and set off on foot. Traveling was tough, especially with heavy bags, and soon they stumbled upon a Fire Nation camp. The commander used firebending to cut off their retreat, and the soldiers quickly cornered the trio against a wall of fire. Everything seemed hopeless, but suddenly the commander fell, struck by an arrow, and then a young man with dual swords and his team jumped down. They quickly dealt with the Fire Nation soldiers, not leaving Sokka a chance to participate in the fight. Aang was thrilled with the new acquaintance, who introduced himself as Jet, and introduced his Freedom Fighters team. Katara thanked them for the rescue. Jet invited the friends to his treehouse hideout. On the way, he told how his team ambushes and destroys roads, planning to free a nearby village. In the evening, they held a feast in honor of the successful operation. Jet admired Aang and Katara's bending, inviting them to stay and help in the fight. Sokka was keen on leaving immediately, but Jet convinced him to stay for the next day's important battle. In the morning, during an ambush on the road, Sokka realized that there was only one person, an old man. However, Jet attacked him, declaring all Fire Nation people enemies. Outraged, Sokka tried to stop Jet, but the freedom fighters took the old man's belongings and returned to the hideout. Sokka told Aang and Katara about the incident, but they didn't believe him and went to Jet for explanations. Jet showed them a poisoned dagger, supposedly belonging to the old man, which convinced Aang and Katara of his righteousness. However, Sokka did not believe and decided to leave. Meanwhile, Jet led Aang and Katara to a river, where they were to fill a reservoir to prevent a fire allegedly planned by the Fire Nation. Following the freedom fighters, Sokka discovered Jet's true plan, to blow up the dam and flood the village to destroy the enemies. Pipsqueak and Smellerbee caught him, and Jet ordered them to take him away. Aang and Katara, helping to fill the reservoir, were unaware of Jet's true intentions. When they realized what was happening, it was already too late. Jet tried to stop Aang and Katara, but they engaged him in battle. Aang fought Jet in the trees, using airbending against the swords. In the end, Katara froze Jet to a tree. However, Jet signaled Longshot and the dam was blown up. The massive wave of water flooded the village, but Sokka had managed to warn the villagers, and everyone survived. Jet remained frozen to the tree, and the friends left him. High above the clouds, Sokka bragged that his instincts had led him to warn the villagers. Aang, laughing, pointed out that Sokka had still gotten the direction wrong. Sokka, smiling, admitted his mistake, but was pleased that he had saved the people. At the campsite, a quarrel broke out between Sokka and Katara. Sokka hadn't put up the rain cover over the tent, which Katara disliked. Sokka pointed to the clear sky, saying it would be better used as a blanket. Then he suggested Katara gather kindling for the fire instead of thin twigs, leading to an exchange of barbs and a collapsed tent. Aang returned with food, catching the tail end of the argument, and proposed that they switch tasks. They agreed, and Aang proudly declared that resolving conflicts was a constant duty of the Avatar. He then helped Momo and Appa share a pumpkin. In the morning, the friends reached a large divide. They were interrupted by a man in light clothing claiming he had hired the guide first. He explained that his Ganjin tribe was fleeing from the Fire Nation and striving to reach Ba Sing Se. A group of people appeared whom Katara mistook for refugees, but the man angrily declared them to be Jangs, enemies of his tribe. Standing beside him, the Jang leader and the Ganjin man began a verbal skirmish. The guide, an earthbender, arrived and suggested starting the crossing. The Ganjin and Jang argued over who would go first. Katara introduced Aang as the Avatar, and he suggested they cross together, but the tribes refused. Aang decided that Appa would ferry the sick and elderly while the rest crossed the canyon together. The guide announced that food couldn't be taken along as it would attract predators, but the tribes ignored this warning. As they descended the narrow path to the canyon floor, the guide restored sections of the trail with earthbending. Suddenly, a giant canyon crawler appeared and grabbed the guide. Sokka repelled it with his boomerang, but the crawler charged at him. Aang created a powerful air vortex, dealing with the crawler, but the guide broke both arms and could no longer earthbend. The tribes accused each other of hiding food, and Aang decided to split them up, sending Sokka with the Jang and Katara with the Gan Jin to learn the origins of the conflict. In the evening, both tribes made camp. Sokka noticed the Jang using the tarp as a blanket, while Katara saw the Gan Jin setting it up over their tents. Both tribes brought out food despite the ban. Katara heard a story about an ancient conflict. Jin Wei, a great warrior of the Gan Jin, was betrayed by Wei Jin, a Zhang who stole a sacred orb. Sokka heard a different version. Wei Jin helped Jin Wei by carrying the sacred orb, but the Gan Jin threw him in jail. The next day, the tribes continued their journey but began arguing again. The leaders drew swords, starting a deadly fight. Aang created a whirlwind, scattering the duelists, and saw the food supplies. He became angry but quickly devised a plan. Luring the crawlers with food, he mounted one. The tribes followed his example and rode the crawlers out of the canyon. Aang threw the food into the chasm, and the crawlers left. Both the Gan Jin and Zhang were impressed by the cooperation. Aang told them that Jin Wei and Wei Jin were twin brothers playing a game of redemption. This convinced the tribes to forget the past and unite. Sokka asked Aang how he knew this story, and Aang admitted he made it up. The friends were amazed, and the Avatar went to open the food parcels, as he was very hungry. In the clear sky, Aang confidently guided Appa while Sokka flew alongside on a glider, with Katara riding on a giant Momo. Suddenly, a black cloud appeared ahead, and his friends disappeared, leaving Aang alone. In front of him floated Monk Gyatso. Asking why he had vanished, Aang touched the monk's figure, and it turned into smoke. A storm began, and Appa plunged into the ocean as voices echoed around.
We need you, Aang.
Briefly seeing the Fire Lord, Aang woke up with a scream. Momo, who had been sleeping on the boy's chest, jumped up and woke Sokka and Katara. Katara was worried about Aang, but he didn't want to talk about his nightmares. The morning was sunny, but their food bag was down to crumbs. Katara suggested stopping at the nearest market to replenish supplies. Sokka, with a grim expression, said they shouldn't go to the market because he had dreamt of terrible things. At the market, Katara realized they had no money, and a vendor took away Sokka's basket of food. Sokka suggested finding work. At that moment, the friends heard a fisherman arguing with his wife about an approaching storm. The fisherman agreed to hire Sokka despite his wife's warnings. While Sokka was loading crates onto the boat,
You turned your back on the world.
Katara tried to defend Aang, but he, upset, flew off into the mountains. Katara quickly climbed onto Appa and followed him. Aang hid in a cave and began telling Katara that the old man was right. He recalled how he was informed that he was the Avatar and shown the toys he had chosen as a child. Aang was disappointed because his life changed and his friends began to avoid him. He spent time with Monk Gyatso, but once overheard that they were to be separated. Scared, Aang ran away but got caught in a storm. Entering the Avatar state, he created an ice sphere in which he and Appa were frozen. Katara comforted Aang, saying that his place was here and now, and he remained the world's hope. At that moment, the fisherman's wife appeared, reporting that the boat hadn't returned. Aang and Katara set off to help. Meanwhile, on Zuko's ship, Uncle Iroh warned about the approaching storm, but Zuko ignored him. Lieutenant G began arguing with the prince, and Iroh had to intervene to break it up. Iroh then told G about Zuko's past. During a war council, Zuko opposed a general who suggested using new recruits as bait. The Fire Lord challenged his son to a duel, and when Zuko refused to fight, he burned his face, sending him on a quest to find the Avatar. The storm hit the ship, and Zuko saved the helmsman hanging from the edge of the shattered bridge with Iroh's help, who redirected lightning into the ocean. Aang found the fishing boat and used waterbending to save Sokka and the fisherman. Entering the Avatar state, he created a protective sphere and lifted everyone to the surface. Zuko locked eyes with Aang but decided not to pursue him, choosing to save his crew instead. Appa returned to the cave, and the fisherman's wife hugged her husband, demanding he apologize to the Avatar. The fisherman offered Aang fish as an apology, and Sokka, receiving it, smiled. Aang thanked Katara for her support, and the fisherman acknowledged that without the Avatar, he would have died. The storm passed, and the bright sun shone on everyone. On the coast of the Earth Kingdom, at a Fire Nation fortress, Commander Zhao observed the training of the Yuyan archers. He requested Colonel Shinu to hand over the group to capture the Avatar. The colonel refused, considering it a whim, but a hawk arrived with an order promoting Zhao to admiral, granting him full control over the garrison. On the rooftop of the tower, a man in a blue mask eavesdropped on their conversation. The Avatar team set up camp in the ruins of the city of Taku. Sokka was ill after the storm, and Katara had also started coughing. Aang found a herbalist school on the map nearby and decided to go get medicine. He left his friends with Appa and Momo and set off on foot to avoid the storm. On Zuko's ship, Lieutenant G reported no signs of the Avatar after the storm. The military council was interrupted by Zhao's ship, and a soldier announced that capturing the Avatar was now a matter of national importance. An enraged Zuko ordered the soldier off his ship while Iroh calmly continued his Paisho game. On the way to the herbalist school, Aang sped past Zhao's scouts so fast that they barely had time to signal. Meanwhile, Katara tried to explain to Momo that they needed water, but the lemur didn't understand. Aang ran up the stairs of the herbalist school and asked the old herbalist woman for medicine. The woman leisurely prepared lunch for her cat and only then remembered the sick people. She suggested putting frozen wood frogs in the mouths of the sick. Aang realized the woman was crazy, but still went to find the frogs. Aang found the frogs, but was attacked by Zhao's archers. He used airbending, but was captured and taken to the Pohuai fortress. Zhao explained that Aang wouldn't be killed to prevent the Avatar from being reborn, but would be kept barely alive. Aang tried to escape, but was shackled. Momo brought Katara many useless items, but still didn't understand that she needed water. A cart approached the fortress, and the blue spirit clung to its underside. In the fortress, he dealt with the guards and freed Aang. Together they sneaked through the sewer but were discovered. They were nearly captured, but the blue spirit used Aang as a hostage to force the gates open. Zhao tried to intercept them with an archer, but Aang and the blue spirit disappeared in a cloud of dust. Aang removed the mask and saw Zuko. Initially frightened, he decided to save him. Zuko woke up in the forest and saw Aang. Aang said he missed his friends and suggested they could have been friends. Zuko responded with a blast of fire and Aang fled. He gathered the frogs and returned to Katara and Sokka. On Zuko's ship, Iroh mentioned that Zuko had missed G's concert. Zuko retreated to his cabin, ordering not to be disturbed. Iroh continued playing the Sungyi horn. Aang, exhausted, also wanted to sleep. He placed the frogs in his friends' mouths and they felt better, though they spat out the live frogs with disgust. The friends stopped by the riverbank where a cheerful moment was interrupted by an unusual green fish teasing Sokka. While Sokka chased the fish with his fishing rod, Aang gave Katara a necklace, which she loved. Suddenly, a roar was heard, and they saw a man dodging attacks from a platypus bear. Confident in his safety due to Aunt Wu's prediction, the man showed no concern. Aang and Appa scared off the bear, after which the stranger told them about the prediction and handed Aang a bundle with an umbrella. As soon as Aang opened it, it started raining, which elicited mixed reactions from Sokka, who considered it a coincidence. On the way to the village, Sokka tried to prove his ability to make predictions but failed with the weather, predicting a prolonged rain that immediately stopped. In the village, the friends met Meng, Aunt Wu's assistant, who instantly became infatuated with Aang. Aang in turn was interested in predictions and learned that Katara would marry a powerful bender. Aunt Wu greeted them warmly and began predicting their futures. Katara was told she would find great love, Sokka would experience much pain and suffering, mostly self-inflicted, and Aang would be involved in a decisive battle between good and evil. Despite the ominous prediction, Aang was more interested in the love topic, and Aunt Wu told him to follow his heart. In the village square, a crowd gathered to hear Aunt Wu's predictions, including the fate of the village situated at the base of Mount Makapu. Aunt Wu predicted no eruption, and the villagers joyfully dispersed. Sokka remained skeptical of the predictions, while Katara returned to Aunt Wu for more forecasts about her daily life. When Aang and Sokka went to the top of the volcano to pick panda lily flowers, Aang noticed that the volcano was about to erupt. They hurried back to the village to warn the residents, but no one believed them, relying on Aunt Wu's prediction. Even the tremors didn't convince them of the impending danger. Aang, Katara, and Sokka took matters into their own hands. Aang stole the cloud reading book and with Katara's help created a skull-shaped cloud in the sky. Seeing this, Aunt Wu admitted her mistake. The villagers, under Sokka's leadership, dug a trench to stop the lava flow. Despite their efforts, the trench was insufficient, and the lava flow continued advancing. Aang created a massive whirlwind that cooled the lava and saved the village. The villagers were grateful, but Sokka reminded them again of his distrust in predictions. Aunt Wu concluded that destiny could be changed just like the shape of clouds, inspiring Aang. The friends said goodbye to the villagers and continued on their journey, while a disappointed Meng watched them leave. During a break on the ocean shore, Aang found a scimitar stuck in the ground. This brought back memories for Sokka of the day when the men of the Southern Water Tribe left the village to go to war. Surveying the surroundings, he found broken arrows and burnt trees, indicating a battle. On the beach, they saw a lone ship that Sokka recognized as one of his tribe's vessels. They set up camp near the ship, and Sokka recalled saying goodbye to his father when he heard a noise and saw Bato, one of the warriors from his tribe. Sokka and Katara hugged their old friend. Bato told them that the tribe's warriors were far away and invited everyone to a monastery. There, he introduced the Avatar and Hakoda's children to the abbess. Bato explained that he had to stay behind due to an injury. Sokka noticed an unusual smell, and Bato explained that the monastery sisters made ointments and perfumes. Bato showed his friends his tent, filled with reminders of home. He invited everyone to a meal. Sokka and Katara reminisced about Bato and their father's adventures, paying little attention to Aang, who felt left out. Bato mentioned that a messenger from Hakoda would arrive soon, exciting Sokka and Katara. Aang felt abandoned when he saw a rider on an ostrich horse. He intercepted the message for Bato, looked at the map, and hid it. The next day, Bato suggested that Sokka undergo a rite of passage from their tribe. The team set sail and headed to a labyrinth of sharp rocks, where Sokka demonstrated his leadership skills, successfully navigating the ship. Bato rewarded him with special marks, but Aang, feeling guilty for hiding the map, confessed. Sokka became angry and declared they would go find their father. Katara, though heavy-hearted, followed her brother, leaving Aang alone. Iroh was making tea on the ship when a huge beast with a huntress, June, appeared on the deck, looking for a fugitive. The beast paralyzed a man with its tongue, and June left, leaving Zuko and Iroh puzzled. They tracked June to a tavern, where Zuko offered her a contract to capture the Avatar, showing Katara's necklace. June agreed for a good price and set the Shirshu on the trail. The Shirshu led the hunters to the ruins of Taku and then to the village of Makapu, where they met Aunt Wu. Bato, Sokka, and Katara, hearing a wolf's howl, decided to return to Aang. Aang, learning of the hunter's visit to the monastery, realized his friends were in danger. At that moment, the Shirshu reached them and paralyzed them. June took the captives back to the monastery, where Aang found them. He fought Zuko and June. Aang and Appa fought bravely while the abbess helped Sokka and Katara free themselves using perfumes. Katara directed a wave of scents at the Shirshu, disorienting the beast. Losing its sense of smell, the Shirshu accidentally paralyzed Zuko and its owner before fleeing. Iroh saved June from falling. As they flew away from the battle, Sokka explained to Aang that they wanted to see their father, but now helping him was more important. Aang returned Katara's necklace, saying it was a gift from Zuko. Katara kissed Aang and asked him to pass it on to Zuko when they met. The friends set course for the North Pole. On their way through the forest, the friends stopped at an information kiosk. Sokka, dying of hunger, searched for a menu but found only an advertisement for the Fire Festival, where they could eat and see firebenders. Katara convinced her brother that they could disguise themselves and leave quickly if needed. The friends headed to the festival, leaving Appa and Momo on a hill, unaware that a stranger was watching them. In the town, everyone was wearing masks. The friends bought masks and began exploring the festival. Sokka burned his tongue on flaming hot snacks, and Aang led the group to a stage where a fire magician was performing. The magician asked for a volunteer from the audience and chose Katara. Unable to hold back, Aang jumped on stage and used an air vortex to extinguish the flames, revealing his identity. Panic erupted, and soldiers started advancing. The stranger who had been following them helped the friends escape by throwing a smoke bomb. Around the next corner, they found themselves at a dead end, but Appa arrived just in time and knocked away the soldiers. The stranger introduced himself as Che and explained that he had deserted from the Fire Nation army. In the forest, Che explained that they served Zhang, a great firebending master. Aang was eager to meet him despite Sokka's objections. Suddenly, the group was surrounded by a band of warriors. The Avatar team was taken captive and led to the riverbank, where there were huts. Che explained that they were captured by Lin Yi, his friend. Meanwhile, Zhao arrived in town and ordered preparations for boats to pursue them. Che returned and reported that Zhang did not want to see the Avatar. Aang resolutely headed to the master's hut, where he faced resistance but insisted on his request. Zhang explained that Aang should first learn water and earthbending. Suddenly, the spirit of Avatar Roku appeared before Zhang and commanded him to start Aang's training. Zhang bowed and agreed to teach Aang. The next day, lessons began. Aang, impatient and eager for action, learned patience and focus. However, his patience ran out when he accidentally burned Katara during firebending practice. While trying to soothe the pain, Katara discovered her gift for healing with water. Zhang explained that this was a rare and valuable gift. Meanwhile, Zhao and his soldiers were approaching. Zhang created a wall of fire to delay them. Zhao, disdainful of his former teacher, believed he would defeat him. Seeing Aang, Zhang disappeared in a fiery vortex, leaving Aang alone to face Zhao. Using agility and quick thinking, Aang manipulated Zhao into destroying his own boats. After the battle, Aang returned to his friends. Katara healed his burn, which sparked Sokka's outrage. Learning of her ability, he began recalling all the times she had helped him. The friends continued their journey to the North Pole, hopeful for the future. The friends joined a camp of traders, where one of them told a story about a giant bird that turned out to be a flying man. Aang thought it was a tale from a century ago, but it turned out that the storyteller's great-grandfather had seen it just last week. Aang directed Appa towards the northern air temple in hopes of finding airbenders. In the distance, they saw the tall spires of the temple and figures flying around them. However, Aang quickly realized that they were merely gliders. A young man named Teo, seeing Aang, challenged him to an aerial duel. Aang demonstrated his skills, proving he was a real airbender, but the duel ended in a draw. Teo, in his wheelchair, invited the friends inside the temple, where they were greeted by his father, the Mechanist. He explained that they found refuge in the temple after a flood and began using it for their needs. Aang was upset seeing how the temple had changed. He sorrowfully looked at the defaced murals and the bison statue billowing smoke. However, one part of the temple remained untouched. When a powerful blow destroyed a monk statue, Aang got angry and threw the battering ram into the abyss. The Mechanist explained that they had lost their home and found refuge in the temple. Aang struggled to forgive the changes. Sokka was impressed by the Mechanist's inventions and went with him to the laboratory, where they devised a way to detect natural gas leaks using rotten eggs. Teo showed Aang and Katara hermit crabs and a gate that only an airbender could open. Aang was reluctant to disturb the past, but later agreed to open the gate so Teo could see what was inside. Meanwhile, Admiral Zhao arrived in town, learning about the Avatar's presence. He directed his forces to the temple, where the Mechanist was forced to work for the Fire Nation. Aang and his friends decided to fight back against the invaders. The Mechanist showed Sokka's invention, a controllable hot air balloon. This would help them in the battle. The battle began. Gliders and other devices were used to attack the Fire Nation troops. However, when tanks appeared, it became clear that small bombs wouldn't stop them. Katara froze several tanks, and Appa joined the fight, but the enemy's forces remained strong. In a critical moment, a hot air balloon appeared in the sky, filled with mud bombs. At first, it seemed insufficient, but then the Mechanist smelled rotten eggs and discovered a gas leak. Sokka and the Mechanist dropped a gas canister, causing a massive explosion that collapsed part of the cliff and destroyed the Fire Nation forces. Aang and his friends achieved victory, but the Avatar had to save Sokka and the Mechanist from the falling balloon. Bidding farewell to the temple's inhabitants, Aang was glad they found a new home there, comparing them to hermit crabs. Sokka also received recognition for his idea. The temple residents supported them, and they continued their journey. Meanwhile, the Fire Nation's Minister of War found the abandoned hot air balloon and decided to use this defeat for future victories, filling the balloon with hot air. After 2 days of flying, Appa was barely skimming the water, and the team was exhausted. Suddenly, an ice wall rose from the water, and Aang barely managed to pull the reins in time. Appa grazed another ice spike and fell into the ocean, which immediately froze around him. Boats with people in blue fur clothing emerged from the icebergs. The friends realized that they had finally reached the Northern Water Tribe. In the fortress made of ice, the gates and inner locks were controlled by waterbenders. Aang and Katara were impressed by the number of waterbenders and hoped to find a teacher. Sokka couldn't take his eyes off a girl with white hair in one of the boats. In the evening, Chief Arnuk hosted a festive dinner in honor of the guests. Arnuk announced that his daughter, Princess Yue, had reached the age of marriage, marking her 16th birthday. Sokka immediately fell in love with Yue. Meanwhile, Arnuk introduced Aang to the waterbending master, Paku. The strict master said that lessons would begin at dawn, giving Aang no time to rest after the long journey. The next day, Aang and Katara went to their first lesson. Aang introduced Katara to Paku, who stated that women were forbidden from learning waterbending combat, sending Katara to Yugoda for healing training. Aang stood up for Katara, but Paku said he wouldn't stop Aang from leaving if he didn't want to learn alone. Katara insisted that Aang continue his training. Seeing Yue, Sokka tried to introduce himself. He asked her to meet in the evening, and she agreed despite her shyness. While training with Yugoda, Katara learned that her great-grandmother, Kanna, was from the Northern Water Tribe and had been betrothed but fled before the wedding. In the evening, Sokka went on a date with Yue, giving her a carving, but she was lost in thought and suddenly ran off. Disappointed, Sokka threw the carving into the water. Back at the lodge, Sokka shared his failure with his friends, and they decided that Aang would secretly teach Katara waterbending. Unfortunately, their lessons were spotted by Paku, who then refused to continue teaching Aang. The next morning, the friends went to Chief Arnuk to have him influence Paku. Arnuk demanded that Katara apologize to the master, but she challenged him to a duel. In the arena, Katara demonstrated her skills, but Paku, using his superiority, defeated her. However, he noticed Katara's necklace and recognized it as the betrothal necklace he had given to Kanna long ago. Paku revealed that he had loved Kanna very much, but she refused to conform to the tribe's customs and fled. Yue, hearing this, cried and ran away. Sokka caught up to her and realized she was engaged. After a kiss, Yue showed him the betrothal necklace and apologized. The next day, Katara was accepted as Paku's student. Although she was late for the first lesson, the master forgave her. Meanwhile, Admiral Zhao convened a meeting of ship captains, preparing for an attack on the Northern Water Tribe. He planned to destroy the tribe's fortress with a formidable fleet. In the evening, Zhao arrived on Zuko's ship and took his crew to prevent any interference in his expedition. He noticed Zuko's familiar swords, but the prince explained that he kept them for decoration. Zhao met with pirates, paying them to eliminate Zuko. That night, an explosion occurred on the ship. Iroh, seeing the flames, rushed to help, but found only burning debris. In Zhao's camp, Iroh blamed the pirates for the incident and joined the expedition. Walking through the ship's corridor, Iroh stopped near the firebenders, and one of them removed his mask, revealing Zuko's face. Iroh said that Zhao suspected nothing and wished his nephew luck. Zhao's fleet headed for the Northern Water Tribe. Every day, Katara grew more confident in her lessons with Paku. In a sparring match, she easily defeated a young waterbender, freezing him atop an ice pillar. Paku, freeing the student, praised Katara's perseverance. In contrast to Aang's playful antics with Momo, Sokka was walking with Princess Yue, admiring the beauty of the Northern Water Tribe city. To cheer her up, he suggested they fly on Appa. They soared into the sky, and Sokka almost kissed Yue, but they were interrupted by black snowflakes, heralding the approach of the Fire Nation army. Zhao's fleet was already close. The admiral ordered preparations for the attack, despite Iroh's warnings. In the Water Tribe fortress, Chief Arnuk announced the imminent Fire Nation attack. Yue told Sokka that they shouldn't see each other anymore as she had a duty to her tribe. Arnuk asked for volunteers for a dangerous mission, and Sokka was the first to step forward. Remembering the attack on the air nomads, Aang decided that things must be different this time. Warriors lined up on the fortress's outer wall as a Fire Nation ship appeared on the horizon. Fireballs breached the wall and hit the city. Aang took to the sky on Appa and destroyed several catapults on the ship, but was captured by a huge man. Appa saved him, and Aang saw the enormous Fire Nation fleet. Arnuk tasked the volunteers with infiltrating the Fire Nation ships. Sokka met the operations commander, Han, and laughed at his old-fashioned armor. Arnuk asked Sokka to brief Han, who was also Yue's future husband. Sokka was shocked, but agreed. The Fire Nation ships approached the fortress, unleashing a storm of fire. Iroh warned Zhao about the strength of waterbenders at night, especially under a full moon, and the admiral halted the assault until dawn. Aang returned to the fortress, where Yue and Katara awaited him. He reported disabling 12 ships, but admitted his strength alone was insufficient. Katara comforted him. At night, Zuko prepared to descend in a boat, and Iroh reminded him of the fire breath technique. The prince descended toward the fortress. Han, boasting, called Yue the best girl, suitable only for the best. Sokka got angry and they fought. Arnuk removed Sokka from the mission and assigned him to protect Yue. Sokka agreed. Zuko infiltrated through an ice tunnel and reached the city center. Meanwhile, Yue led Aang and Katara to the oasis, where Aang entered the spirit world. Zuko appeared, and Katara engaged him in battle. The moon enhanced Katara's bending, and she trapped Zuko in an ice sphere. However, at dawn, Zuko broke free and defeated Katara, capturing Aang. At dawn, the Fire Nation launched their attack. Firebenders breached the wall and stormed the city. Katara woke up alone in the oasis. Soon joined by Yue and Sokka on Appa, Katara recounted her defeat. Zuko, carrying Aang on his shoulders, trudged through the snowstorm, determined to reach his goal. Aang opened his eyes and found himself in a fog-covered swamp, where he noticed a meditating baboon spirit and asked for help in finding the moon and ocean spirits. The baboon initially told him to leave, but after opening one eye, directed Aang to follow a glowing orb. Aang caught the orb on a tree branch, but fell into the swamp, where he saw the reflection of Avatar Roku in the water. Roku explained that the ocean and moon spirits were ancient, and that the only one who knew them was the spirit Ko, who steals faces. He warned Aang not to show any emotion when meeting Ko. Gritting his teeth in fear, Aang understood how to handle Ko. Aang ventured to a massive dried-up tree and descended into a dimly lit cave where Ko resided. The multi-legged creature recognized Aang as the new Avatar. Ko revealed that centuries ago, he stole the face of the Avatar's loved one. Aang maintained his composure, and Ko informed him that the moon and ocean spirits were called Tui and La, always dancing in a circle. Aang recalled the fish in the oasis pond and realized he had found them. Bidding Ko farewell, he returned to the surface. Roku suggested that Aang seek help from the giant panda spirit Hei Bai, who quickly transported him back to where the Avatar entered the spirit world. The panda blew on Aang and he returned to the physical world. Katara and Sokka ventured out into the snowstorm beyond the Northern Water Tribe city to search for Aang. Zuko, carrying Aang's lifeless body, found a cave, lit a fire, and shared his thoughts with the captive about the constant obstacles in his path. The Water Tribe city faced fierce attacks from Zhao's soldiers. Iroh reminded Zhao of the approaching night and the waterbender's strength under moonlight. The admiral declared his intention to remove the moon from the sky. Aang returned from the spirit world to find his body missing. Katara saw a bright object in the sky and realized it was Aang's spirit. They directed Appa towards it. Aang woke up, released an air blast at Zuko, and flew out of the cave. Katara, arriving with Sokka on Appa, knocked the prince to the ground with one attack. Despite Sokka's objections, Aang took the stunned Zuko with them. Meanwhile, Zhao reached the spirit oasis and captured the white fish, placing it in a bag. The moon immediately turned red, waterbending ceased to work, and Fire Nation soldiers resumed their assault. Yue and Aang both experienced severe headaches. The princess revealed that she had been very weak and sickly as a child. Chief Arnuk had brought her to the oasis, dipped her in the pond, and her hair turned white, after which she recovered. Zhao raised the bag and proclaimed himself the moon's killer. Momo jumped onto the admiral's head, and soldiers came to his aid. Aang and his friends arrived just in time. Zhao threatened to kill the fish, and Aang tried to convince him that it would throw the world out of balance. Iroh supported Aang, taking a fighting stance. Zhao seemed to relent and release the fish, but at the last moment he struck the pond with a fire blast. Everything turned gray, and the moon vanished. Iroh attacked the admiral, defeating the guards, but Zhao managed to escape. The friends saw the wounded fish. Yue wept, saying it was all over. Aang disagreed, his eyes glowing, and the same happened to La. Aang entered the pond, everything glowed blue, and the wave transformed into a giant creature with the avatar at its center. The ocean spirit moved through the city, and the Water Tribe warriors bowed before it. Aang controlled the creature, scattering Fire Nation soldiers and their equipment. Meanwhile, Zhao hurried to his ship but was stopped by Zuko. Seeking revenge, the prince attacked. Zhao accepted the challenge, accusing Zuko of treason when he became the Blue Spirit. The admiral also stated that if Zuko wanted to survive, he should have chosen shame and defeat. In the oasis, everyone mourned over the dead Tui. Iroh realized that the moon spirit had touched Princess Yue. She confirmed this and unexpectedly declared that she had to return the life given to her. Sokka tried to dissuade her, but she was resolute. Yue touched Tui's wound, was enveloped in a bright light, and fell dead into Sokka's arms. The ocean spirit, embodied in Aang, reached the fortress wall and began destroying the Fire Nation ships. Within minutes, the massive fleet was in ruins. Yue's body dissolved into the air and Tui came back to life. Iroh returned the fish to the pond, and it resumed its eternal dance with La. Yue's spirit appeared before Sokka, bid him farewell, and vanished. The moon returned to the sky, and the ocean spirit calmed down, disincarnating. A weakened Aang returned to his body. Zhao, seeing the moon in the sky, was shocked and couldn't believe his plan had failed. Huge tentacles grabbed the admiral and dragged him to the bottom of the canal. At dawn, Pakku announced to Katara that he and several others would travel to the southern pole to help rebuild the Southern Water Tribe. He appointed Katara as Aang's teacher. Arnuk and Sokka mourned Yue's loss, proud of her sacrifice. Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Momo hugged after a tough night, looking hopefully towards the new day. Iroh and Zuko floated on a raft through the Fire Nation fleet's wreckage. Upon learning of Zhao's defeat and Iroh and Zuko's betrayal, Fire Lord Ozai summoned his daughter Azula and assigned her a special mission.